Our first speaker today is the head of an investment firm which specialises in mergers, acquisitions and capital raisings in agriculture, food and beverages. Would you please welcome Managing Director of Kidder Willams Limited, Mr. David Williams.
Thank you, Jane. I'm just waiting for my microphone. When Tracy asked me to come and speak today, I think for those of you who know me know I don't really have that much experience on the land. What I do have a lot of experience with is foreign buyers and foreign investors. We've sold quite a number of abattoirs, probably 6 or 7 in the last few years, and quite a number of meat value-added businesses, so I've got quite a good understanding of everything from coals backwards to the farm, but not so much on the farm, and I've got a very good understanding of Chinese and Indonesian and other buyers. So I thought today I'd talk a little bit about foreign investment and national investment, super funds and what they're doing and what they're not doing. And as I flew up here, I thought to myself, well, what sort of mood are you going to be in? Because I might sort of taper my message to that. I'm just going to really roughly talk off the top of my head. And I thought to myself, well, most of you would have seen a bit of rain in the last couple of weeks. That's a good thing. Most of you know that the live trade in Indo's sort of back and they're paying enormous prices. Most of you know that Chinese have now said they'll take 1 million head. I doubt it's going to happen, but let's see what happens. And we've still got the live trade into other places like Vietnam and Israel and all the others. There are people working on protocols for taking live animals into the US. If that happens, it's a massive boost to the industry. We know that Coles and Woolies can't get as much meat as they want because the US trade is just booming, the box trade, their herd's down. So there's an enormous amount of meat going into the hamburger market over there. So I'm thinking that this morning, most of you aren't going to be all that interested in talking about foreign investment, but I've flown up here, so I'm going to talk about it anyway, so you're going to get it whether you like it or not. But in addition to that, what I see has happened is that in the last year, the federal government's got itself really revved up about the North. For the last 50 years, you've been the poor relations, sitting down by the toilet at the wedding. Nobody wants you anymore. Everybody's pointing the finger at you. Listen, we've thrown so much money at the North over the last 50 years, nothing's worked. If the floods didn't get you, the heat got you. If the heat didn't get you, the diseases got you. If you could get all that right, you couldn't get the labour up there. The North is dead and northern experiments are dead. But suddenly, everybody's back. Every department's here. It's like a farmer wants a wife on steroids happening in the North. The bus has arrived, but instead of a whole lot of tricked up women on the bus, you've got the Department of Ports and the Department of Roads and the Department of Defence and the Department of Infrastructure and the Federal Treasurer and the Minister for Ag. They're all on the bus. They want to love you and kiss you. Suddenly you're back in town. It's unbelievable. It's farmer wants a wife on steroids with the feds. So I'm figuring that you must be as happy as a dog with 2 dicks at the moment, right? You don't necessarily want to know about what's happening in foreign investment. So I got a little bit ahead of myself. I should have, in the traditional way, thanked the traditional owners of the land, which, as you know, is Gina Reinhardt and Twiggy and Harold Mitchell and Brett Blundy and so forth. Well, they're not the traditional owners, as you know, but they're sucking out a lot of oxygen in the system. But let me say something about people like that, about not only people, the trophy hunters, if you like, but the people that are like National Mutuals and the AMPs, who, as you know, everybody's belying it. All the federal politicians are saying it's a disgrace, trillions of dollars not going into agriculture, etc., etc. What I know after doing this for 32 years is that every 5 or 10 years these people pop up and they stay around for 5 years, they stay around for 10 years, but generally they're gone after 10 years. You are the only bunnies who want to hang around for longer, right? These people buy because they think it's a good idea and then they're gone. There's a story I like to talk about Harold Mitchell, who bought Yugawalla just over the border, and who I know quite well, lives in Melbourne. He came out of the media industry and the advertising industry. He bought Yugawalla 8 years ago. It might not be Harold. It might not be a true story about Harold, but he buys it. This is a guy that lives in an apartment in the centre of Melbourne, who's been in the advertising industry, which through the 80s was famous for its parties with cocaine and hookers and spa baths and things like that. And suddenly he's sitting in a property just over the West Australian border. What do you think he's thinking to himself as he sits there for a month with nobody to talk to? 2 months to talk to, right? Suddenly one day there's a knock at the door, and he goes to the door and there's a guy. He says, "I'm your neighbour." Harold goes, "I don't have any neighbours." He goes, "No, I'm just over the border. I'm 100k away. I'm your neighbour." He says, "Well, so what?" He says, "I've come to invite you to a party at my place on Saturday night." Harold says, "Beautiful. I haven't been to a party for ages. I haven't even spoken to anybody for ages." He said, "Listen, 7:30, be there. There'll be a lot of drinking. I hope you don't mind drinking." Harold said, "I've drank a lot of Bollinger in my life. I can handle a bit of drinking, So the guy heads down the stairs. He's just about down the stairs. He turns around and he says, "Listen, by the way, there's got to be a bit of fighting as well. That's not going to upset you, is it? Any fighting?" Harold goes, "No, I'm just happy to go to a party. A bit of drinking, a bit of fighting, that doesn't matter." And he gets about to get into his ute and he says, "Oh, by the way, could be a bit of sex. That's not going to upset you, is it?" Harold goes, "No, I'm interested in sex. No problems about that." And the guy gets into his ute and Harold says, hey, you didn't tell me. What's the dress standard?" And the guy goes, "No dress standards, just you and me, whatever you want." Now, a lot of these trophy hunters, I say it jokingly, but they're not going to be around in 10 years' time. We went through all this rubbish in the late 80s and the early 90s when the Japanese just about bought everything up in the meat processing industry. 10 years later, half of them were broke, and now we got Nippon left, and we got a few traders, Mitsui and Mitsubishi, trying to do a little bit of trading and so forth, but essentially are gone. Some of the businesses went broke. Some of them made a lot of money. We hope they make a lot of money when these foreign investors come in. We hope all of these people make a lot of money, but I can guarantee you that most of the trophy hunters will be out in 10 years, even people like Harold, in my opinion. So what's happening in Canberra? What is all this noise coming out of Canberra? At the one hand, they're trying to encourage development in the north. Fantastic. On the other hand, they're trying to scare the living shit out of every foreign investor that wants to come into the country. And if you're not scared about it, well, you better get in a queue, mate, because you've got to get on the list. If you're buying something more than $15 million, it costs you more than $15 million to buy a 7-Eleven store in Melbourne now. Got to get yourself on the list, got to get yourself registered, and if that doesn't scare you, well, we're going to kill you by 1,000 cuts in the FIRB. So try and sell Nicoletti Station, try and sell VDL, try and sell Kidman's, try and sell a big cotton property. You are guaranteed just about to be held up for months and months and months with questions and questions and questions, and then you might not even get it done. So imagine those poor buggers, the two major bidders at the moment for Kidman, who are both reportedly Chinese. The process started probably a year ago. People thought the valuation, and the valuers thought the valuation should have been around 300 million. We're now talking prices of 370, and it still can't get through. We're still held it up. Oh, we found a rocket range on one of the properties. Shit, what were we thinking? Why didn't we remember that? One of them's too close to Pine Gap. Why didn't we remember that? So now we got people like Scott Morrison and some of the other pollies going around. It would be a shame if this wasn't bought by an Australian. Oh, okay, fine. But the Chinese bidders, in good faith, have probably spent $1 million each on land surveys, on water surveys, on accountants, on lawyers, etc., and they're still left hanging in the lurch. Look at VDL, Van Diemen's Land, up in the northwest of Tasmania, 20,000 milkers, 20,000 cattle on the property. It's been on the market for 3 years. 3 years, and not one Australian's put up his hand. The Chinese have come along and paid a price that I think's way over the top, but they paid a price, and suddenly Jan Cameron, ex-owner of Kathmandu, who happens to live nearby, and others have come out of the woodwork and said, "This is unfair. This should be sold to an Australian." Where were you 3 years ago when the train was leaving the station? If we're going to have this foreign investment, we should allow it to happen in an orderly way and in a way in which people can make firm decisions. And we're just killing some of these potential buyers and some of these potential investors. Now, the other thing I find curious, before I go into the details of some of what's happening in the foreign investment, is just the concept. Do we want foreign investment or not? Now, let's just take VDL, for example, which is a very clear-cut example. Van Diemen's Land in northwest of Tasmania, one of the most beautiful pieces of land ever. As I said, 20,000 and 20,000. The Chinese are buying it. They're going to take it to 40,000 milkers. It'll be the biggest dairy farm in the country by 1,000,000 miles. That is going to take a shitload of money for extra water, for extra fences, for extra dairy milking cows. And when they get to 40,000 head, they will put up their own dryer. That's an $80 million investment. And they will take their own brand and they'll take the product into China, etc., etc. Okay, that's the plan. What's wrong with that? VDL is the oldest company in this country. It wasn't even started in Australia. It's a UK company started in 1824 with a royal charter. It doesn't even have you don't make changes to this company and go to ASIC. Make changes to this company, you've got to go to the Queen, because it's a royal charter. Literally go to the Queen's office and get her to change it. So this is a company that was started by the Brits in 1824, and it stayed that way for over 100 years. It was then bought by a New Zealander who unfortunately died in a travelling accident. It was then bought, more recently, by a very logical buyer for a dairy farm and a beef farm, the New Zealand New Plymouth Council. A local council, believe it or not, bought Van Diemen's Land. What is that about? Well, that's exactly what the local ratepayers started to ask as well, by the way. Could anybody just tell me what happened here? I must have missed it. You know, we're a council in New Zealand, we buy a dairy farm in Australia. What is it going on about? Anyway, the short story is that since 1824, Van Diemen's Land has been owned by the Brits and the New Zealanders. And the New Zealanders, because they're under a little bit of pressure from home, the ratepayers, you know, why are we in a dairy company, they decide to sell it. And no Australians put up their hand, no institutions, no dairy funds, no future fund puts up their hands. I'll come back to the future fund in a moment. The Chinese put up their hand, they pay an enormous price, and they're going to invest in it. Hallelujah. Now people go, it shouldn't be foreign owned. Mate, it was started by foreigners. It's not even an Australian company, for fuck's sake. It was started by the Brits, owned by the Brits, owned by the people across the ditch, and now somebody else foreign wants to buy it. What can you object about that? And the guy's going to shove in probably $100 and $200 million into it. Tell me what's wrong with that. How long does it take you to think about that in order to approve it? Well, apparently a long time, according to the FRB. You know, apparently. Now, with respect to the northern meat industry, this is an industry in the north of Australia, if you go back again, at the turn of the sort of 19th century, when it became sort of feasible to take frozen beef in ships. Some entrepreneurial Brits, that's where we came from, by the way, some entrepreneurial Brits said, wouldn't it be good to take some beef from Australia to Britain? So they set up companies like Borthwick's, companies like the Angus family, companies like the Vesti family, set up some abattoirs in northern Australia, and set up some pastoral companies in northern Australia, and started exporting carcasses to the UK, frozen. It's a very short killing season because, you know, roads weren't so good and you can only do it in the dry season and blah, 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 right? It was a foreign-owned industry. And all the beef in this country essentially went to Britain, as did the offals and as did the sheep and so on and so forth. And over time, you know, more abattoirs came up, and in the first instance, a lot of the abattoirs didn't come out of private investment, came out of local councils. And so local councils set up abattoirs, and the feds, all they did, which was what they should be doing today, was to set up the beef roads, the roads that actually help the graziers to get the animals to the slaughterhouses, extended the killing season, blah, blah, blah. And so those roads serviced the abattoirs that came up in Townsville, at Rocky, in Mackay, in Tennant Creek, in Darwin, etc., etc. It was a foreign-owned industry. And more recently, you know, as time went on, private money started to come into it, the Tees, the Smorgans, the Tancreds, the F.J. Walkers, you know, the Gilbertsons, etc., etc. So it became quite a vibrant industry. But this is an industry which was a foreign-owned industry. And at the start, it was mainly foreign-owned. There wasn't private capital that went into it. And people like, for example, the Future Fund, I keep saying, oh, wish AMP was in, I wish National Mutual was in. What about the Future Fund? What have they got, 60 billion? You know, why aren't they buying VDL? Well, that's a very good question. I'll tell you a very interesting anecdote. The guy that runs the Future Fund and the agricultural land investments is a guy called Barry Blakey. And he is an ex-dairy farmer from northern Tasmania. He's the last person who wants to buy VDL. Right? These instos are not coming to invest. despite a little bit I've seen in the press where Barnaby's beaten them up and they're saying, well, agriculture's coming into its own, yes, we're thinking about it. They're not thinking about it. They're not going to take the sort of returns that you guys are happy to put up with for the last 20 years. That's bullshit. They're saying they're thinking about it to make Malcolm and Barnaby happy, but they ain't coming, mate. They ain't coming anywhere near this industry because they don't want 3% return over the longer term. And in my 32 years, I see every 5 or 10 years, National Mutual pops up and they got $500 million worth of property. Beautiful. And 2 years later, the guy who did it's gone. And then somebody goes, whose idea was it to buy this? Let's get rid of it. And they sell it out again. And out it goes. And usually what do? They usually sell it to the guy that owns the farm next door. You guys aren't prepared to bid them when they're bidding against you because you can't afford it. You just want to spend your time bleating about how little money you've got, right? I'm a poor farmer, I don't make any money, there's nothing in it, nothing available. Yep, you don't get your hand in your pocket at all, do you? Until the farm next door comes up for sale. Then it comes whistling out from under the mattress, Robobank's on speed dial, let's get it in, come on. That's when it happens. But you ain't going to beat these guys. You ain't going to beat these guys, and they are not coming. And the guy that is the first to come probably lose his job 2 years later because they just don't have the rate of return. So how is it that the foreign investors are coming and paying the rate of return? There's a couple of things. The easy ones are that many of them are coming with very, very low cost of capital. So we're dealing with some Chinese at the moment who want an all-up equity return of 5%. There isn't an institution in this country that isn't looking for 10 or 15%. So they're coming with a much lower cost of capital, a much lower hurdle rate that they have to invest. The second thing they're coming with, and bear this in mind, and this is what we really need as a country, they're coming sometimes with a market. They come and they go, I've got a feedlot in Indonesia. I've got 3,000 pharmacies in China. They're coming with that market, and because they've got that market, they can add extra value to the investment itself. That is a very powerful thing. And when you think about it, that's exactly what the Vesties did, what the Engels did, what the Borthwicks did. They came and said, I got a market in Britain, and that's why I can afford to set it up. That's not what Harold Mitchell's got. That's not what Gina Rinehart's got. That's not what Twiggy's got, although he's now got himself an abattoir as well. That is a very different thing, and you can add significant value to that. The third thing they got is they got very, very deep pockets. And some of what it takes for your farm to make more money is just really simple, capital. I've been on a couple of farms just recently, owned what I call trophy farms that are running 20, 30,000 head that could easily do 50 or 60. Why not? Well, nobody's prepared to write a cheque. These people can write a cheque. And so if you look at, for example, what Kay's done, KAI, over in Kununurra on the Ord 2 scheme, Mr Yin, they've already spent probably $180 million clearing 9,000 hectares. And by this time next year, it'll be 18,000 hectares. And in addition to not only clearing it, irrigating it, putting roads in, etc., they've bought the old sugar mill, they bought the country club, they've set up a case dealership, they can bring fertiliser in boat. So they're not only getting the economies of scale for themselves, but they're changing the whole dynamics of the industry itself. So they can get significantly more out of the industry. And that's if you want to know what to do and where to go, have a look at what Mr Yin's doing at Kai, have a look at what Brett's doing at Beetaloo, have a look at what Malcolm Harris is doing, have a look at what Trevor Lee's doing, because this is all a part of trying to get more value out of your dollar. So here we've got industries that have been started in this country by foreigners that in the early days was owned by foreigners, and now we're turning around saying, well, we don't want foreigners. The third thing that some of these foreigners have gotten, especially the Chinese, is that they've got a different psychology, and this is a serious point. I've got a few young kids who work for me, 29, 30 years old, and they're all hell-bent on buying property at the moment. I mean, I'm talking about a house, and they're very expensive in Melbourne, Sydney, as you might know. And I'm saying to them, look, I think the market's about to collapse. And so just hold off for a year or two. You might get this 30%, 40%, 50% cheaper. Kids don't see that because these kids are 29, 30. Since they left university or since they left school, all they've seen is increases in property prices. For people in this room, in terms of rural prices. For people like me, in terms of residential prices in, say, the Melbourne market, we know that in 1990, I bought a house in 1990 for half the price that it was sold for in 1990 and 1989, because the market just completely collapsed. Young people don't see that because they've only lived in an environment where they've seen good times, and they just don't believe when I tell them that the property market can go down. The same is true of Chinese. In the very recent past, which is all we've got to go on with China, anybody like a property developer who's bought that Ord Stage 2 thing, Mr. Yin and his partner, all they've known for the last 10 years is they know that if I put up a $500 million building in Shanghai, and by the way, I should have said the people who bought Ord Stage 2 are just property developers. They just develop units in Shanghai. All they know is that when I spend $500 million on a property in Shanghai, guess what? 2 years later, it's worth $1.5 billion. So that's their psychology. And when they come here, they've not only get deep pockets, but they've got a different psychology about how the market works and how profitable it's going to be for them. We know different, of course. We know that prices can go up and down. We know that the Indo market can die tomorrow. We know that JBS and Tees might never open Townsville or Rocky again for another 2 years because they could be pricks about it if they wanted to. We know all that. We know that it's happy days today. It's the farmers, wants a wife on steroids today, baby. But in 2 years' time, and it's probably going to last another 2 years, but in 2 years' time, who knows where that's going to be? So there, we've got a very different psychology about investing, and so too have the institutions in Australia, not just cost to capital. The Chinese don't do that. They've got a different psychology, they've got a different market, they can bring their own market, and so on. This is one of the great ironies, of course, because we've got the federal government saying, build up the north, build up the north, build up the west, and we've got some very positive things happening, not just the feds. I'll come back to them in a moment because it's a bit of bullshit, but I think the Western Australian government in particular, and the northern, where I see the Northern Territory government heading, is very, very positive in terms of what they're going to do with leasehold. So they're very open, especially at the moment, the Western Australian government, to giving away freehold land in return for development, to do the sort of things that Mr. Yin and his mates are doing, to say to somebody, listen, you've got 100,000 hectares, if you develop up 100 hectares of that in the following way, in 5 years' time, we are going to give you that as freehold. And they will do those deals, and they have done those deals. And so, Monty House, who was the ex-Minister for Ag in WA, is now Chairman of Landcorp, is leading that charge. He was the one who negotiated the Mr. Yin Kai investment in the Ord. So I think there's a lot of interesting things happening there. We need this capital, though. This country needs the capital, and it needs the capital for a whole lot of reasons. Number one, it needs it because some of you might want to exit. And in many cases, we're seeing a lot of properties being sold at the moment, not so much here in Northern Territory, but around the country. There are a lot of properties being sold in the last 12 months that have been on the market for 2 or 3 years. VDO was on the market for 3 years. We just got a buyer. So this is a way of releasing capital back into Australians' hands. It's a way of building up the assets. It's a way of getting farm betterment. It's a way of bringing new markets into the country that we wouldn't otherwise have. These are all very positive things that the country needs, and we should be embracing these people. Now, it's not just a matter of new capital. Look at Deniliquin, it's opened a new abattoir. Look at Dandenong, the old Castrican site, opened a new abattoir. $60 million went into the old Castrican site with Joey Catalfamo, who had Tasman Meats, and Chinese investors. They're bleeding. They're tearing up dollar bills every day, but they are breathing new life into communities where assets have been closed for 10 years. They've got Deniliquin up and running. They've got Dandenong up and running. They're killing it. They're doing 300 head a day, and they should be doing 1,000 or 1,200. Are you listening to this, Jason? I saw Jason up the back. That's what's happening. You've got abattoirs all around the country, can't get enough animals through, and they're bleeding. And the benefit is finally to you, because in the last 3 years, these guys are made out like bandits, and now they're hurting a lot. But what I'm saying is that foreign investment is opening up new cities, it's opening up new towns, it's giving new employment where there was none before, and that's got to be embraced. And from my perspective, the Feds should be embracing that and taking it by force. This capital, by the way, is coming from everywhere. I told you about Mr. Yin. He's a property developer in Shanghai. I told you that, for example, I just mentioned Joey Cattlemen, who's opened 2 new abattoirs. He had Tasman meats. We sold it to JBS. But when we sold it, of the 10 bidders we had, 3 of them were governments, and one of them was Avraham Abramovich from Russia, the wealthiest man in Russia. Doesn't have any meat. He just wanted to get the money out of Russia in case things go pear-shaped. What is driving governments buying assets? Food security. What is driving people investing here out of Norway, out of Russia, out of Greece? It's a matter of getting your money out of what they see as a euro crisis, a eurozone crisis, a crisis in the euro itself. There's a lot of reasons why people want to put money down here, and if it's available, we should be taking it. Now, do I care? Do I care who buys our assets? If you're a seller, you don't give a rat's. Just give me a good price, get me the capital, and I'm out, right? But as a country, we probably do care, and as a seller, you probably do care, because some of these buyers, if they come with a lower cost of capital, if they come with an existing market, if they come with the ability and the capital to expand the business itself, you're going to get a better price. And as a country, we're going to get a better result. So it does matter, but the process of going through a sale process itself should solve that for us in any case. It's not all about foreign investment. I think one of the things I'm quite keen on, wherever I go in the country and I see some of my clients in other areas, is that I see an enormous number of people who have got the blinkers on. When you get too close to the trees, as you have to do when you're running your own business, sometimes you don't see the ability to change your farming methods and get more out of your farm. And I think there's 2 bits I've got in my head. Number one is, to ask yourself the question, how can I farm differently so I get more output? How can I increase my herd? How can I increase my turn-off rate? How can I tap the aquifer? How can I change my breeding? And sometimes it's just as simple as capital. I've been on some farms recently, so the managers say, you know what, I can take this to 40,000 head from 20, but I just need a check. So you've got to find a partner. Sometimes it's as simple as tapping an aquifer, maybe, and taking it from 20,000 head to 100,000 head. You need a partner. You need somebody with deeper pockets. But we've got to think outside that head, because if it's as simple as that, then you can increase your herd size. If you've got water, you can increase your offtake. If you've got water, you can start to do some Euro crosses. You can start to do some things outside of just the pure Brahmins and so forth. So I'm looking in my own client base for ways in which to expand and improve the business of farming itself. The second part, which I think is even more important, is to start thinking of yourself as not just a price taker. Not just I'm sitting here and I'm going to have 2 or 3 good years out of 7. I'm not just a price taker. What is going on around the country that is pulling some people out of that? And one of the things that's going on is that there's a lot of people starting to play on the provenance. They're starting to say, I've got a brand here, I've got a brand, and I know what the brand is. It might be the region, it might be the breed, it might be Harold Mitchell, it might be this is the fighting, sex and drinking beef of Western Australia. Get yourself a provenance and see what you can do with that. And have a look at what's happened in the wine industry over the last 10 years. The glut of grapes, the guys in the winemaking industry got on their planes and they went around the world, and there's hardly a place in the world at the moment where you can't find Australian wine. Not off the back of a big distributor, off the back of small local distributors. Now, you're not going to get a Provenance brand with Coles or Woolies, they want their own brand. But there's plenty of ways in which you could tie up with people in Japan, people in Vietnam, people in Indonesia, and so on and so forth. And we're doing that at the moment. I act for, say, Bega Cheese, for example. We've just done a deal with a chain of 3,000 supermarkets in China, in the middle of nowhere where you've never heard of, and the guy wants a Bega branded UHT milk. We don't produce milk, but we're doing it for this guy. And so if you start to think about, how can I make more out of my business? Why do I want to do that? I want to do that because I want to get better returns, I want to get more consistent returns, and I don't want to just be a price taker and wait for when the Indonesian market fails, and then I look towards Townsville and Rocky, and the abattoirs still aren't open, and then I go, oh, now what? Oh, well, I'll have to take the price off Colin McKenna at Midway, and that's not going to be pretty, and I'm going to have to pay $50 a head to get them down there. So let's think about, I think, you want to stay on the farm and you don't want foreign investment, you don't want a partner, there are things to think about in terms of your own supply chain and what that can do. Now let me say something about Canberra. All this stuff about we love the noise. Are we nearly done? We love the noise. We're going to do anything for you. We're going to build you a new port. We're going to build you a new road. We're going to build you a new dam. Beautiful. What I want to know is, do we really want a new Tanami road? What about fixing up the Buntine Highway? You know, as you get towards that Western Australian border, you've got the West Australians doing it on one side, you've got Northern Territory on the other, and it peters out. It's as though neither government knows that it actually connects. And when you go onto the federal government website that looks at the road network, I looked up the Buntine Highway, and for a tenth of the cost of a Tanami road, you can fix it. It says, serious mass limits, maximum 13 axles, dangerous, empty travel encouraged. Empty travel? I'm trying to get 1,000 head up the road, for Christ's sake. Who are these people talking to? Talk to the farmers, talk to the drivers, and you'll get a different answer. At the same time, I saw yesterday, aquaculture in the Northern Territory came out, another white paper, 300 pages. Now, I bought Tassal out of receivership for 42 million. It's now worth 800 million. It employs 1,400 people. It's the most profitable aquaculture business in the country, and it's worth more than every other aquaculture business in this country combined. Did anybody come and ask me about the aquaculture in the north? Nobody. So I think to myself, what the fuck is going on in this country? That's what I think. And James just told me to wrap up. I was going to say some other things, but I'll hold those over. Thank you very much. Thanks. Do you want me to stand here or not? Okay. Vassie Felix.
Thank you very much, David. That was a
one bottle, it couldn't have been that good, you know.